The wind in Redemption Springs didn't just whisper, it accused. It howled through the dusty street, carrying the poison of the crowd with it, and it slapped Olivia Blackwood right in the face. She stood frozen in the town square, a living statue of shame. The town had once been home. Now it was a cage of hungry lions, and she was the meat. Every pointed finger was a dagger. Every jeer was a stone thrown at her swollen belly. She clutched the thin wool of her shawl, but it offered no protection. The words still found their way in. Disgrace, harlot, sinner, each one landing like a punch. Olivia kept her chin held high, a trick her father, the judge, had taught her. Never let them see you bleed. But tears were gathering, hot and sharp, threatening to betray her. She was only 22. Her father was just 3 months in the grave, taken by consumption, and she was carrying the child of a man who'd whispered promises of love and marriage, then vanished with the spring cattle drive, leaving her with nothing but a rounding belly and a town full of hate. Her hair, once pinned up like a proper lady, was coming undone, falling in loose strands around her face. She just needed to get to the general store. Just a few supplies, flour, salt. Enough to last another week in the house that would soon be seized for her father's debts. But the store owner, Mr. Watkins, a man she'd known since she was a girl, blocked the doorway. His shadow fell over her, cold and heavy. "We don't serve your kind here," he grunted, his arms crossed over his thick chest. "Your money's no good in Redemption Springs, Miss Blackwood." The blood drained from her face. It felt like the ground was tilting under her feet. "Please, Mr. Watkins," she begged, her voice a fragile thread. "I just need a little flour." "Should have thought of that before you went and shamed your family name," he spat. The crowd murmured its approval. "What would your poor father say if he could see you now?" That question was the cruelest cut of all. Judge Thomas Blackwood, a man of principle, of respect, a man whose good name was now being dragged through the mud by his own daughter's mistake. The crowd pressed closer. The women hid their smirks behind gloved hands. The men stared, their eyes a sickening mix of disgust and something else, something far more predatory. She was trapped. She was alone. And she was terrified. She took a step back, clutching the few coins in her purse. This was more than just shaming. This was dangerous. This was a town turning into a mob. And then a voice cut through the noise, a voice like a whip crack. "That's enough!" The sea of bodies parted. A man was striding toward them, moving with a confidence that owned the very ground he walked on. He was tall, his shoulders broad under a worn duster. A dark hat was pulled low, shadowing eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Elijah Remington, owner of the Double R Ranch, the biggest cattle baron in the territory. He was a ghost story in this town, a man who kept to himself, building an empire from dust and grit. Some said he'd been a gunslinger. Others whispered he was a war hero. Nobody knew the truth. They only knew the results. A ranch that was the envy of the territory and a man you did not cross. He came to a stop in front of her, placing himself between Olivia and the snarling crowd. "Last I checked," Elijah said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the square, "this was a civilized town. Doesn't look very civilized from where I'm standing." The sheriff, a portly man named Miller, shuffled forward, hitching his gun belt. "Now, Remington, this ain't your concern. The lady has brought shame upon us." "Shame?" Elijah's voice dropped an octave, and a chill went through the crowd. "I see a pack of wolves circling a cornered doe. That's the only shameful thing I see here." His gaze swept over them, a silent challenge. One by one, they looked away. Not a single soul was brave enough to meet his eyes. Olivia stared at him bewildered. She'd seen him in town before, a distant, formidable figure. They'd never spoken beyond a polite nod. Why was he defending her? Why would a man like Elijah Remington care about the fate of a fallen woman? He turned to her then, and the hardness in his face softened just a fraction. "Miss Blackwood, I believe." She could only nod, her voice caught in her throat. "I understand you need supplies." It wasn't a question. "Yes," she managed to whisper, hating the tremble in her words. "But I'm not welcome." Something flickered in his eyes. A cold, hard anger. He took off his hat, a gesture of respect so unexpected it made the crowd gasp. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Blackwood." The world seemed to hold its breath. He stepped closer, his voice dropping so low only she could hear it. "These good people," he said, the words dripping with sarcasm, "seem concerned about propriety, about your situation." His eyes were fixed on hers, intense, unreadable. "I'm offering you a solution." He raised his voice again, making sure every last one of them could hear his next words. "Miss Blackwood, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Silence. A thick, stunned silence fell over the square. Then, a wave of gasps and shocked murmurs. Olivia felt like she might faint. Her mind spun, unable to process what was happening. "Mr. Remington," she stammered, "you can't be serious." "I'm rarely anything but serious," he said, his voice back to that low, private rumble. "I'm offering you my name, my protection, a home for you and your child at the Double R. You would want for nothing." "But why?" she whispered, searching his face for an answer. "You don't even know me." A shadow passed over his features, a fleeting glimpse of some old, deep pain. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be judged by lesser men." He turned his gaze back to the crowd, his voice booming once more. "What's it to be, Miss Blackwood? Will you marry me? Here? Now? Or will you take your chances with their hospitality?" He was offering her an escape, a way out of the pit that was about to swallow her whole. Destitution, starvation, or worse. Her father's house was gone. No one would hire her. This stranger, this powerful, enigmatic man, was offering her a lifeline. But it felt like a dream, a madness. "Why here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why now?" A faint smile touched his lips. "So there are witnesses," he said simply. "So every man and woman in this town knows that from this moment on, you are under my protection. So no one ever dares to lay a hand on you or speak your name with anything but respect." The logic was brutal and perfect. He wasn't just saving her. He was making a statement. He was drawing a line in the sand and daring anyone to cross it. She looked at the hateful faces in the crowd. Then she looked at the strong, determined man standing before her. She had no choice. Not really. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "Yes, Mr. Remington, I accept." The crowd erupted in a roar of disbelief. Elijah paid them no mind. He turned, his eyes scanning the throng until they landed on a thin man in a dusty black coat. "Reverend Parker, your services are required." The Reverend scurried forward, wringing his hands. "Mr. Remington, this is highly irregular. The banns must be read." "The only thing that needs reading is your Bible, Reverend," Elijah cut him off, "unless you're refusing to perform your duty." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but sharp as a razor. The Reverend swallowed hard, pulled a small Bible from his pocket, and nodded. "Very well, if you'll join hands." Elijah held out his hand. It was large, calloused from work, but his touch was steady as he took her trembling fingers. In that moment, with the whole town watching, a strange sense of calm washed over Olivia. Just hours ago, she was facing ruin. Now, she was marrying a stranger in the middle of the street, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone. The ceremony was a blur. The Reverend mumbled the words, his disapproval clear. But Elijah's voice was strong and clear. "I do." When it was her turn, Olivia found her own voice. "I do." "Then I pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend finished, snapping his Bible shut. "You may. Kiss the bride." Elijah looked at her, a question in his eyes, giving her a choice. She nodded. This had to be sealed, for all of them to see. He leaned down, and his lips met hers. It was brief, gentle, but it sent a shock of warmth through her. It was the first kindness she'd felt in so long. He pulled back and faced the stunned crowd. "My wife," he announced, the words echoing in the silent square. "Will be completing her shopping now. I trust there will be no further issues." He looked directly at Mr. Watkins. The store owner turned pale and practically tripped over himself to get out of the doorway. "Of course, Mr. Remington. Mrs. Remington is most welcome." Elijah nodded. He squeezed her hand once, a firm, reassuring pressure. "I'll fetch the wagon. Take your time." "Wife." The word seemed strange on his tongue, but he said it with a finality that left no room for argument. Then he turned and strode away, leaving Olivia standing on the precipice of a new life. She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and walked into the general store. The whispers followed her, but they had changed. The condemnation was gone, replaced by a feverish curiosity. Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, the one who had shouted, "Disgrace!" the loudest, approached her by the flour barrels. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. That was quite a performance. One has to wonder what a man like Mr. Remington gets out of such a charitable arrangement. Olivia looked her dead in the eye. "My husband's motivations," she said, the word tasting like power on her tongue, "are his own." Mrs. Peterson's face tightened. "Mark my words," she hissed. "A marriage like this won't last. He'll tire of his charity case before the snow falls." Olivia gave her a cool smile. "How fortunate for me that I didn't ask for your opinion." She turned her back on the woman and continued her shopping, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was Mrs. Remington now, and these people were about to learn what that meant. When Elijah returned, she had a basket full of supplies. He walked to the counter, and without a word, added a bolt of soft blue fabric and a packet of sewing needles. He glanced at her questioning look and just shrugged. "Thought you might need it?" The simple, unspoken kindness almost broke her. She blinked back sudden tears, refusing to show weakness. Not here, not now. He paid, carried everything to a sturdy wagon, and helped her onto the seat. As they drove out of Redemption Springs, Olivia didn't look back. She could feel the town's eyes on her, but for the first time, she felt a strange sense of freedom. Whatever waited for her at the Double R Ranch, it had to be better than the hell she was leaving behind. The wagon wheels creaked a lonely rhythm on the dusty road. They rode in silence for what felt like an eternity. The prairie stretched out around them, vast and empty. Olivia studied his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the sun-weathered skin. Who was this man who had plucked her from ruin? Finally he spoke, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. "I imagine you have questions." "Several," she admitted. "I don't know where to start." He nodded. "Fair enough. Let's start here. This is a marriage of convenience. For your protection. You'll have your own room. Your privacy will be respected. I expect nothing from you that you are not willing to give." Relief washed over her, so potent it made her dizzy, but it was mixed with something else, a faint, strange sting of disappointment. "I appreciate you clarifying, Mr. Remington." "Elijah," he corrected, his voice gentle. "We're married. Might as well use first names." "Elijah," she repeated. The name felt solid, real. "Is it because of my father? Did you do this because you knew him?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Partly," he finally said. "Your father was a good man. He gave me a chance when no one else would, but mostly, I did it because what they were doing was wrong. No person deserves to be treated like that. He paused, his hands tightening on the reins. There are rules at my ranch, Olivia. Simple ones. You show respect, you do your share, and you never ever go into the west wing of the house. It's locked for a reason. Understand? A chill ran down her spine. The west wing? The warning was delivered so calmly, so matter-of-factly, it was more terrifying than any threat. What was he hiding? What kind of place had she agreed to call home? The beautiful ranch she saw in the distance suddenly looked ominous, its shadows deep and full of secrets. The house was beautiful. Weathered wood, a wide porch, gardens blooming with late-season flowers even in the harsh landscape. It was an oasis. But his words echoed in her head. The west wing, locked for a reason. As they pulled up, a woman came out onto the porch. She was short, sturdy, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She wiped her hands on her apron and sized Olivia up in a single, sweeping glance. "Mrs. Winters," Elijah said as he jumped down, "I've brought someone for you to meet." He came around and helped Olivia down. "This is Olivia, my wife." The woman's eyebrows shot into her hairline. That was the only sign of her shock. "Is that so?" she said, her voice dry as dust. "Welcome to the Double R, Mrs. Remington. I'm Martha Winters, the housekeeper." There was no warmth in her welcome. Her eyes were like chips of ice. "Mrs. Winters runs the household," Elijah explained, seemingly oblivious to the woman's hostility. "She'll show you to your room. The blue room. It's in the east wing." He stressed the word east just slightly, a warning. Mrs. Winters led her inside. The house was clean, comfortable, filled with sturdy furniture and books. But it was silent. Too silent. "This way," the housekeeper said, her voice clipped. She led Olivia up the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall. She opened a door to a lovely room, painted a soft blue, with a large bed and a window that looked out over the rolling plains. "The master bedroom is across the hall," Mrs. Winters said, watching her with that unnerving stare. "But Mr. Remington instructed me you'd be staying here, separately." "Yes," Olivia said, a blush creeping up her neck. "That's the arrangement." "Good," the housekeeper said, and for a moment Olivia thought she saw a flash of something vicious in the woman's eyes. "Dinner is at 6. Don't be late. The master doesn't like his routine disturbed." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "And I'd stay out of the West Wing if I were you. The first Mrs. Remington learned that lesson the hard way." The door clicked shut, leaving Olivia alone in the silent, beautiful room. The first Mrs. Remington? The blood in her veins turned to ice. He'd been married before, and something terrible had happened to his wife. Something connected to that forbidden part of the house. She sank onto the bed, her mind racing. This wasn't a rescue. This was a trade. She had exchanged one cage for another. This one just had prettier bars. Who was Rebecca, the first Mrs. Remington? And what happened to her in the West Wing? Later, a soft knock came at the door. It was Elijah carrying her small bag. "Is the room to your liking?" he asked, his face unreadable. "It's lovely," she said, her voice tight. "Mrs. Winters mentioned you were married before." His jaw tightened, a muscle flexed. "Yes. Her name was Rebecca. She passed away." He offered no other details. The subject was clearly closed. "I had this room prepared a few days ago," he said, changing the subject. "After I heard what was happening to you in town." She stared at him. "You planned this? Before you saw me in the square?" "I planned on offering you help," he corrected. "A job, perhaps. The marriage. That was a spur-of-the-moment decision." He almost smiled. "Impulsive for me." But Olivia wasn't smiling. He had been watching her. He knew about her situation. This wasn't a random act of chivalry. It was calculated. He wanted something. But what? After a silent, tense dinner, he walked her to the bottom of the stairs. "Good night, Olivia," he said, his voice formal. He didn't touch her. He just watched her walk up the stairs, his eyes following her until she disappeared into her room. She locked the door behind her, her heart pounding. She was a prisoner here. A prisoner of a man with a dead wife, a locked wing, and secrets as vast as the land around them. She looked out the window at the dark, empty plains. There was nowhere to run. The next few days were a quiet, nerve-wracking hell. Olivia kept to her room and the main parts of the house, always aware of Mrs. Winters's watchful eyes. The housekeeper was a ghost, always there, silent and disapproving. She seemed to hate Olivia with a passion that was chilling. Elijah was a different kind of phantom. He was polite at their shared silent meals, but distant. He would ask about her health if she needed anything, but his eyes were always guarded. He spent his days out on the ranch and his evenings locked in his study. The heavy oak door was as formidable as the one leading to the west wing. He'd offered her the ranch's account books, and she'd accepted, grateful for the distraction. She had a good head for figures, a skill her father had encouraged. As she pored over the ledgers, she started to piece together the story of the Double R. It was a masterpiece of hard work and smart decisions. Elijah had built this place from nothing. But then she found it, a hidden ledger tucked away in the back of the desk drawer. It was filled with entries she didn't understand. Payments, large cash payments, made regularly to an account in Redemption Springs, an account belonging to Sheriff Miller. It was blackmail. There was no other word for it. Her husband, her savior, was paying off the law. But why? What did the sheriff have on him? As she dug deeper, her blood ran cold. The payments had started almost 4 years ago, right around the time the first Mrs. Remington had died. Olivia felt a wave of nausea. She slammed the ledger shut. What had happened in this house? Did Elijah? Did he kill his wife? Was Sheriff Miller the only one who knew the truth? Was that why Mrs. Winters hated her so much? Because she knew Olivia was sleeping under the same roof as a murderer? The questions swirled, making her sick with fear. She had to get out. She couldn't stay here, not with this dark secret hanging over the house. She waited until nightfall, until the house was still and silent. She packed her small bag, her hands shaking so badly she could barely tie the laces. She had a little money saved, hidden in the lining, enough to get a stagecoach ticket, to go anywhere but here. She crept down the stairs, each creak of the floorboards sounding like a gunshot in the silent house. She reached the front door, her hand on the latch, freedom just a breath away. Going somewhere? His voice came from the darkness of the parlor. Olivia froze, her heart stopping in her chest. Elijah stepped out of the shadows, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He wasn't angry. He just looked. Tired. Resigned. "You found the other ledger, didn't you?" he said. It wasn't a question. She couldn't speak. She could only nod, her eyes wide with terror. He took a slow sip of his whiskey. "I suppose it's time you knew the truth," he said, his voice heavy with a pain so deep it seemed to suck the air from the room. "The real truth about what happened to Rebecca." He gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Olivia. This is not a story for standing." She sat, her legs trembling. He remained standing, staring into the fireplace as if he could see the past playing out in the dying embers. "Rebecca wasn't like you," he began, his voice a low rasp. "She was from Boston, used to society, to parties. She thought this was an adventure, but the silence, the isolation, it ate at her. She grew fragile, depressed. When she became pregnant, I thought it would give her hope, a new purpose." He fell silent for a moment, the memory clearly painful. "The baby came early, a little boy. He was weak. The doctor from town, he was old, drunk half the time. He did his best, but the baby didn't make it through the night." Olivia's hand went to her own belly. A wave of sympathy washed over her, momentarily eclipsing her fear. "Rebecca, she broke," Elijah continued, his voice cracking. She wasn't just grieving. Her mind. It snapped. She would wander the halls at night calling for a baby that wasn't there. She became a danger to herself. I had to lock the doors to the west wing where the nursery was, to keep her from hurting herself. He finally turned to look at her, his eyes hollowed out by grief. One night I came home late. There'd been a stampede. I was exhausted. I forgot to check the lock on her door. In the morning, I found her. She had gotten into the west wing. She had. She had taken her own life. A strangled sob escaped Olivia's lips. The story was more tragic than she could have ever imagined. Sheriff Miller was the one who came out to do the report, Elijah said, his voice turning hard as steel. He saw a grieving husband and a tragic accident, but he also saw an opportunity. He hinted that it looked suspicious. A young wife, dead under mysterious circumstances, a husband who stood to inherit her considerable fortune. He said for a regular contribution, he could make sure the official report was clean, that no ugly questions were asked. So that was it. Not murder, blackmail, born from tragedy and greed. I paid him, Elijah said, his voice filled with self-loathing. I paid him because I couldn't bear the thought of Rebecca's memory being dragged through the mud. I couldn't stand the idea of people whispering that I'd hurt her. It was a coward's choice. But I made it. He looked at Olivia, his face a mask of shame and despair. I married you to protect you from that town, but I also did it for myself, your father. He was the only man who suspected what Miller was doing. He was investigating it quietly. He was going to help me. But then he got sick. He took a step closer. When I saw them turning on you, his daughter, I saw a chance to repay the debt I owed him, a chance to do something right after doing so much wrong. But I've trapped you here, with my secrets, my ghosts. He gestured to the door. You're free to go, Olivia. I won't stop you. You deserve better than this haunted house. Olivia looked at him, at this broken, honorable man who had been living in his own private hell for 4 years. She thought of the cold hatred from Mrs. Winters, now understanding it was born from a fierce, protective grief for the woman she had cared for. She thought of the town, so quick to judge and condemn. She could run. She could leave all of this behind. But as she looked at Elijah, she didn't see a monster or a jailer. She saw a man who had shown her kindness when no one else would. A man who had suffered an unbearable loss and was still trying to do the right thing. She stood up, walked over to him, and gently took the whiskey glass from his hand. You're not a coward, Elijah Remington, she said, her voice soft but firm. You're a good man who made a hard choice, and I'm not going anywhere. For the first time since she'd met him, she saw the walls around his heart crumble. She saw the raw, vulnerable man beneath the armor. And in that moment, something shifted between them. The arrangement, the marriage of convenience, it all fell away, leaving something fragile but real in its place. Just as this new understanding bloomed in the quiet room, a frantic pounding echoed from the front door. It was one of the ranch hands, his face pale with panic. Mr. Remington, there's a carriage coming up the drive, a fancy one, and there's trouble down at the south pasture. The fence is cut. Cattle are running everywhere. Elijah's head snapped up, his grief replaced by instant, sharp-edged authority. Trouble? Before the ranch hand could answer, the front door burst open. Sheriff Miller stood there, a smug grin on his face, and behind him, stepping gracefully into the entryway, was a woman dressed in expensive city clothes. She was beautiful, poised, and her eyes were fixed on Elijah with a look of cold possession. Elijah, darling, the woman said, her voice like honey laced with poison. Did you really think you could hide from me out here in this wasteland? Sheriff Miller stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun. Elijah Remington, he announced, his voice booming with false authority. I have a warrant here from back east. Seems this woman, Miss Harriet Caldwell, has a claim on you. A marriage contract, signed and sealed, which makes your little ceremony with Miss Blackwood here null and void, and it makes you a bigamist." The room spun. Olivia stared in shock. Harriet Caldwell. The name meant nothing to her, but the woman's predatory smile said everything. This was a setup. The cut fence, the stampede, it was all a distraction. "Harriet," Elijah said, his voice dangerously low, "what is the meaning of this?" "The meaning, my dear, is that our arrangement is back on," she said, waving a document in her hand. "My cousin Rebecca's death was a tragedy, of course, but her fortune reverts to me now, and according to this agreement we signed years ago, so do you." She looked past him, her eyes landing on Olivia's swollen belly with pure venom. "And as for your, local charity project, she and her bastard child can go back to the gutter where you found them." Sheriff Miller puffed out his chest. "You're coming with me, Remington. We'll sort this out down at the jailhouse." His eyes glinted with triumph. This was his chance to finally crush the man who had held power over him for so long. It was happening so fast. Elijah was trapped. The blackmail he'd been paying was nothing compared to this. This would ruin him, destroy everything he had built. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They had underestimated Olivia Blackwood. She stepped forward, placing herself between Elijah and the sheriff. "This marriage contract," she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "I'd like to see it." Harriet laughed. "And who are you to make demands?" "I am this man's wife," Olivia said, her eyes blazing, "and the daughter of Judge Thomas Blackwood, and I know the law." She snatched the document from Harriet's hand. Her eyes flew across the page, her mind racing, pulling on every legal lesson her father had ever taught her. The language was dense, complicated, but then she saw it. A fatal flaw. "This contract," Olivia announced, her voice clear and cold, "stipulates that it is only valid in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It has no legal standing in Wyoming territory." She looked directly at Sheriff Miller. "You, a sworn officer of the law, are attempting to enforce an invalid out-of-state document. That's not just wrong, Sheriff, it's a crime." The sheriff's face went from smug to sickly white. He looked at Harriet, who was staring at the contract in disbelief. "Furthermore," Olivia pressed on, her confidence surging, "I have here—" She walked to the desk and picked up the secret ledger. "A detailed record of payments made from Mr. Remington to you, Sheriff. Payments that began the week after his first wife's death. Payments that look an awful lot like blackmail." The color drained completely from Miller's face. He started to sweat. "I think," Olivia said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "that the territorial marshal would be very interested to see this ledger, and to hear about how you've been extorting one of this territory's most prominent citizens for 4 years. Miller began to stammer, backing away. "Now hold on, Mrs. Remington. There's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding," Elijah's voice boomed as he stepped beside Olivia, "is that you thought you could get away with it." He looked at the ranch hands who had gathered in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. "Boys," he said calmly, "it seems the sheriff has misplaced his badge. I think you should escort him, and this lady, back to town, and send a wire to the territorial marshal in Cheyenne. Tell him Redemption Springs has a job opening." The trap had been sprung, but it had snapped shut on the wrong people. As the ranch hands hauled a sputtering Sheriff Miller and a shrieking Harriet Caldwell out of the house, Olivia felt a sharp, sudden pain grip her lower back. She gasped, stumbling forward. Elijah caught her, his face instantly filled with alarm. "Olivia? What is it?" She looked up at him, a weak smile on her face. "I think," she said, her breath catching, "that our daughter has decided to make her grand entrance." The timing was both terrible and perfect. As the drama of their lives reached its fever pitch, a new life was demanding to be heard. The storm outside the house had been nothing compared to the one inside. And now, a new storm was just beginning. The labor was long and hard. A blizzard had descended on the plains, cutting them off from town from any hope of a doctor. It was just them, and a terrified but determined Mrs. Winters, whose cold facade had melted away in the face of the crisis. She saw not a replacement for her beloved Rebecca, but another woman in peril, and all her years of frontier experience came rushing to the surface. Elijah never left her side. He held her hand, wiped the sweat from her brow, and whispered words of encouragement, his own fear a palpable thing in the room. He had lost one wife in this house. The terror of losing another was written all over his face. "You're not going to lose me," Olivia gasped between contractions, reading his thoughts. "We're too stubborn for that." And through the pain, through the fear, they held on to each other. The secrets were gone. The lies had been burned away. All that was left was the raw, terrifying, beautiful truth of their situation. Two broken people, thrown together by fate, who had found a strange and powerful love in the ruins. Hours later, as the blizzard raged outside, the cry of a newborn baby filled the silent house. A healthy, screaming baby girl. Mrs. Winters cleaned the child, her hands, once so cold and disapproving, now impossibly gentle. She wrapped the baby in a warm blanket and placed her in Olivia's arms. Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she looked at her daughter. She was perfect. She had a tuft of dark hair, and when she opened her eyes, they were the same piercing blue as Elijah's. He sank to his knees beside the bed, his shoulders shaking with relief. He reached out a trembling finger and touched the baby's cheek. "Hello, little one," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "What should we name her?" Olivia asked, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Elijah looked at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Grace," he said, "because that's what you've brought into this house." "Grace." Olivia smiled. "Rebecca Grace," she said softly, "for the past and for the future." He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss filled with gratitude, and a love so profound it left them both breathless. In the heart of a storm, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, their family was born. 1 year later, the Remington family carriage rolled back into Redemption Springs. It was a fine carriage, pulled by 2 strong horses. Elijah sat tall, a well-cut suit replacing his usual ranch clothes. Beside him, Olivia looked radiant in a blue dress, her hair pinned up neatly. And in her arms, little Gracie, dressed in white lace, gurgled happily. The town stopped to stare. This wasn't the shamed, broken woman they had cast out. This wasn't the grim, solitary rancher. This was a family, prosperous, happy, powerful. They stepped down in front of the general store. The new sheriff tipped his hat respectfully. Mr. Watkins scrambled out, bowing and scraping, eager for their business. Mrs. Peterson, seeing them from across the street, turned a dull, angry red and hurried away. They walked through the town, head held high, a silent testament to the town's failure. They hadn't destroyed Olivia Blackwood. They had, in their cruelty, created Olivia Remington. They stopped in the town square, the very spot where it had all begun. The place of her greatest shame was now the stage for her greatest triumph. Elijah took her hand. "Any regrets?" he asked, his blue eyes twinkling. She looked up at the man who had taken the biggest gamble of his life on her, the man who had faced down his own demons to build a future with her. She looked at the beautiful daughter they were raising together. "Not a single one," she said, her smile as bright as the Wyoming sun. She leaned in and kissed him, right there in the middle of town, for all the world to see. It wasn't a kiss of desperation or convenience. It was a kiss of love, of victory, and of a redemption they had made for themselves. Their story shows that sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones that everyone else has thrown away. If you enjoyed this journey from shame to triumph, don't forget to like and subscribe because every forgotten corner of history has a story waiting to be told.